Morning, everyone. Here we are continuing with our Living Intuitively series. Before I start, I wanted to mention something to you that many of you may be aware of. I opened a Patreon account, page, I guess you call it. Patreon is this very creative system for individuals to support creative work, filmmakers, music makers, all kinds of people, and apparently also Asha Nayaswami and her Mission of the Masters. It's just a super innovative idea based on the fact that with the internet, everybody can find out about everybody. The ministry that I've been doing here for all these years has been supported mostly by volunteers or through the staff of Ananda Palo Alto, but everything has expanded so much, the work that everyone is doing, including my part of it, that I've really needed to become more. I've needed my own staff to help, which has all been wonderful. But for the first time, actually the first time literally, I need financial support. And Patreon is a way where people can support something they believe in. So Patreon, it's really easy, and just type my name in, and if it appeals to you to be able to help with this work, I would be very grateful. So now let's begin with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dearest Swamiji, help us to be attuned to your presence, to be calmly centered in our hearts, to be clear and strong in our minds, and to be completely receptive in our souls, that even the merest whisper of your guidance will be received, and that we will have the courage and the clarity and the determination to do in this world as you would have us behave. We are your children. Be with us always. Om. Peace. Amen. You don't really have to ask God to be with you. It's almost insulting. I have to think about how to say that better. I was always asking God to be with me, but it's it's a question that doesn't have to be asked. I mean, that gets into the whole reason of why do we pray. We pray because it changes our consciousness, and when our consciousness changes, we're more connected to the divine. So when I'm asking God to be with me, what I'm saying actually is, help me to know that you are always with me. I don't have to beseech him to do it. Which sort of brings us into what I wanted to talk about today. And I lose track of when I last said anything. When you watch these on recordings, they're just all next to each other. There happens to be a gap of about 4 or 5 days between my last broadcast and this one. In between, a lot happens. And part of my sadhana, always, but especially for 2021, is to be in the now. So I hope I don't repeat myself too much, but after the last class, and partially in it, I had some really big revelations about intuition. Those of you with whom I've communicated for many years recognize certain themes. So I'm just, if I repeat myself, I apologize. The whole question of intuition for me has always been a little bit confusing. The following guidance and so on like that, God knows I have certainly done my best to do the right thing, really, since I was born. And as I became a devotee, I understood that doing the right thing had to do with attuning myself to God's presence. But the whole idea of being intuitive, being a sensitive, being guided by God, doing God's will, there was always a whole lot of stuff around it. And I'm a very feet on the ground sort of person in certain ways. I'm just very practical. I mean, I looked at my kitchen recently and I realized that over time, every little job that I want to do, I have the right tool for it. I like to just be grounded in this world, know what I need and know where it is. I always put my car keys in the same place. It's just like, I'm very practical. I'm very feet on the ground. And so I'm not inspired by things that cause me to float. And somehow the whole subject of guidance and intuition sometimes gets a little wrapped up in a kind of ability to not have to be real grounded. Now, I'm not casting aspersions on anyone. This is just how it's come across to me. So there's been a little bit in me for a long time that has just resisted that idea. And I've shared with you on other occasions that after I taught a class about how to know and trust your inner guidance, because it's a very good class, meaning it's a very important class. And when I'm traveling and I need people to come to my classes, it's a very good class. So I've taught the subject, and I've taught it, as I said, when I started this whole thing. This little file might not really look that important to you. This file is decades old in my life, and it has notes from a class that Swami gave on guidance. I reduced his class down to 22 points, and that gave me the capacity to teach the class. And I really thought this is the class I was going to teach. Ha ha, which is actually good because as Swami himself put it, if the teaching experience is not instructive for the person who's giving it, then you need to work harder to make it so. In 1972, Swami he had written 14 Steps to Perfect Joy, which is now what's known as the Art and Science of Raja Yoga. He wrote that course from like 1968 into 71 or so, and he wrote it by dictating one lesson a week when he was driving back and forth from San Francisco to Ananda Village, and he needed money and he needed to expand the work. And then when he finally was living at Ananda Village a year or two later, and he didn't have to do all that other work, he sat down with the course to rewrite it because, as he put it, even though many people liked it, writing it had not been a growing experience for him, and therefore he felt he needed to work harder at it so that it would be in the moment new. And then he did work very hard on it. He said sometimes if he just wasn't clear about a point or couldn't think of an original way to say it, he said he would just stop working and meditate on it, sometimes for an hour, sometimes for a week, sometimes for a month, because he needed also to be expanding his consciousness if he expected it to have magnetism. So in all the thousands and thousands of hours in which I have talked over the many years, that same principle has always been active for me in the sense that I don't like to present from memory, is the way I put it, which is meaning I'm just saying what I've said before because I know it's true and it works. But for me, I'm just repeating. It's his road. It doesn't mean anything. That doesn't mean I can't pick up these 22 points because I have given classes I've been very pleased with. But once I started, and I said this last time, because we called this living intuitively, that kind of oriented it differently. And I found it very hard to use these 22 points. I keep trying to do it, but I can't do it. Oh, no, let me just finish this thought. But when I would give that other class, I remember specifically a time when I gave the whole class, and Swami's notes are very nuanced. And afterwards, this man came up to me and talked to me, I think it was a man, and made it very clear to me that he hadn't understood a single word that I said. And in fact, I felt that I had increased his delusion rather than helped him escape from his delusion. And I was talking to Swami on the phone very soon after. I told him I quit. I'm not going to teach this subject anymore. It's too subtle, and I don't feel like I'm doing any good. Swami's answer was, he was very emphatic. Asha, developing intuition is the most important thing on the spiritual path. You have to keep trying to help people do it. So I said, okay. I mean, he didn't give me any sympathy, absolutely none. And it's not like he wouldn't have or never had, but he wouldn't. So I accepted that. Now, the balancing side of this is, well, I know that I have a lot of intuition. I know that a great deal of what I do is intuitive, and I've come to appreciate that much more recently. But teaching this class has finally explained to me sort of what it is that I'm doing. which is, of course, all Swami's 22 points. It's all part of it. But, and this is what I came to last week, and I just want to say it a little more clearly, a little more strongly. Swami says intuition is calm feeling. He's put that somewhere. And when he talks about the importance of intuition, is that feeling is a fundamental aspect of human nature. It's part of what God made for us. Chitta. Chitta is pure feeling, because the experience of reality is an experience that moves us. We don't merely observe it. We don't merely analyze it. We don't merely think about it. It takes us over. That's what feeling is. You're with friends, or you're with someone that you love, and all of a sudden you're taken over by a wonderful feeling. You hear beautiful music, you see a beautiful natural scene, and you're taken over by something that is much more than just the idea of what you're looking at. There's a huge, deep feeling component. The problem is that feeling often slides over into, just for lack of better words in English, what we call emotion. Feeling is pure and centered. Emotion is when it becomes duality. I like this, and therefore I don't like that. I want this, and therefore I don't want that. And emotion is when feeling gets off center. So sometimes people think then that feeling itself is not an asset. And they try to go with reason. This is the sort of futuristic stainless steel universe in which we all behave like machines, that we're just programmed and we do this and we're not disturbed by feeling. And you have your heroes are these ice people with ice blue eyes, and never a hint of feeling crosses their eyes because they just behave according to whatever. It's a horribly unattractive view, and it's also entirely unrealistic, because it's feeling that motivates us. It's when the feeling is strong that the action follows. And people who are too deficit in their heart's feelings may think and talk all the time, but they never do anything. That's the principle of Shakti. And that Shakti is required. That's the energy, and it's female. Shakti is female because feeling is associated with female, reason is associated with male. I'm not talking physical bodies. I'm talking cosmic forces. And the Shakti force is the feeling force, and it's considered to be feminine because that's how it is. That's feminine and masculine. That's the balance. Now, again, I emphasize that has nothing to do with the gender of your body. It has to do with attaining the perfect yin-yang balance in the universe. So, as Swami describes intuition as pure, calm feeling. And then when you have a pure, calm feeling about something, you just know what you're going to do. And part of among his 22 points about how you can tell whether something that you feel strongly is actual superconscious intuition or just an intense emotion that you feel strongly. Because when something is in tune with the way that we are, it feels right because it's in tune with the way that we are. It's consistent with the direction that we're already going, and it gets reinforced, and then it feels right, which is always just a little dicey, which is what Swami's 22 points are about. You can't really be sure all the time because you have to make sure that the feeling is pure and calm. And over the years, I have not been gifted on a daily or perhaps even on an annual basis, or maybe on an annual basis, with times when I knew that I had a purely intuitive idea that just came to me. I remember when the idea came to demonstrate at the SRF convocation to inform the SRF members about the fact that SRF had been suing us for 12 years and had spent about $50 million on it, which the members did not know. The idea of demonstrating on the sidewalk, we called it educating people rather than demonstrating, was hugely controversial within Ananda, as you can well imagine. It's a long story. I put it in Light Bearer. It doesn't have to be told here. But the point was, Swami himself was a little unsure and was feeling his way with it and was a bit neutral on it. And finally, when I finally was talking to him toward the very end of the process, and I said, "Sir," I said, "it came to me in that way." And he knew what I meant. That way was completely impersonal, just absolutely calm, because he'd raised a question as to whether or not the effort would succeed. I said, "Sir, it came to me in that way, and therefore I've never doubted that it would work." And Swami's response was so interesting. He says, "Oh, well, then, of course, you have to do it." Prior to that, he'd been on all sides of the question. But when I expressed that, and we had enough history that he knew what I meant, because I never said that. I rarely said that, and when I said it, it had truth to it, because I never wasted those words. However, I recognize that even though I appear to be an extremely reasonable person, much of the time, let's say a reasoned person, Swami actually said to me about me. He was saying, as a rule, most men are more rational than women. Women tend to have less of that strong rational element. However, then he said, as an editorial comment, I don't think there are many men who could beat Asha in rational argument. So even though I have a tremendous amount of that, I actually know, and this I just have to say out loud, that it's my intuitive feelings about things that actually guide my life and have guided it forever. And last time I spoke, I put it together. I really put it together, which is that I know what the guiding principles of my life are. I would even say it even more strongly than that. I learned to cook. Swami Kriyananda taught me to cook by changing my consciousness over the course of one weekend, which is just another odd story that I never know what to do with, so I don't often tell it, but he saw that I needed to learn to cook, and I cooked with him, hosting this guest for 3 days, and at the end of the time, I knew how to cook. Now, let's see, why am I saying that? Oh dear, just a second, let me find the point. Oh my goodness. Oh yes, and I learned to cook because Swami needed someone to cook for him. Eventually, of course, others took over. It was never my destined job, but for the first 6 or 7 years, 8 years that I was at Ananda, I cooked for him. I hosted for him. Whenever someone would come, a guest would come, I just took over that job because I could do it. And then for the rest of his life, I would cook for him when he would visit me and so on. And I learned to cook. And at one point, I had a very, very consistent cooking philosophy, extremely consistent. And one day I asked myself, what is it? I said, oh, I cook the way Swami likes it. And my guiding principles, I call Swami my pole star. It's a simple way of saying it. Everything in my life has been to the best of my ability, which is feeble, but nonetheless, it's my effort. I align myself with what I learned from him and with my whole heart embrace. This is by no means a mindless acquiescence, that I feel that being in tune with Swami's vibration, matching his vibration, as much as I can in everything that I do, that's the right way for me to live, because it brings me everything else that I want. So as a consequence, the word pole star is exactly the right word, because it's fixed. That's what the pole star is, it's fixed. So no matter where you are, you find the pole star, you align yourself with it, then you know what to do. So that's what I've been doing since 1969 when I met Swami. And I may be inept at it, and my feeling might turn into emotion and carry me off to the wild blue yonder. But at some point, I find the pole star, and I at least attempt to come back. So what the pole star does, what having a pole star does, as it happens, mine is Swamiji, but it could be whatever it is that I always know how to turn emotion back, at least attempt, to pure, calm feeling. And once it's back, or at least as close as I can bring it to pure, calm feeling, that's intuition. But it doesn't come, except rarely, as a sudden voice. Well, it does come as a sudden voice, but I recognize the voice. But it's not a sort of like, and this is the other part of it, you see, it's not as if I have to look for it. Now I'm actually saying something that I mean to say. When you have a pole star, you don't have to go in quest. You don't have to sort of stand there in some kind of like confused state, asking God, what do you want me to do? Because you just find the pole star. And because I have spent so much time with what Swamiji gave me, there's just this huge reservoir of understanding that once I realize that I'm off of it, I can come back to it. I remember when we first moved here in 1987 and started developing what has been developed here, community in the temple, the school, the bookstore, the whole gestalt, just providing a wonderful, and it's just been a heavenly experience of community and the opportunity for people to come to Master and learn and dive in and know. I was very impressed all along that I would say I don't think I ever met a situation in which I didn't have a reference point from Swami about how to do it. And I remember in the first decade of work here, it was just so interesting to watch it unfold. Just, oh yeah, I remember he talked about this. A person responds this way. Oh yes, Swami said that. Oh, we're having to deal with this issue. Well, this is how Swami would have handled it over here, and these are the principles that apply. And it was just like all the way through. And I never really thought of that as intuition, but what else would it be? Because it wasn't reason, although I supported it with reason. This is just, thank you, God. He gave me this mind that works in that way. So I can bring also to mental clarity, much of the time, not always, but most of the time, I can bring also to mental clarity the feeling. And then, because once I have it at mental clarity, I don't reference the feeling that much, but the feeling is the Shakti of the feeling is what pushed it to bring it to that point of clarity. If the feeling hadn't been there, I would have gone in another direction. Now, I don't want to overstate this because, I'm just a humble serving devotee, just doing my best not to fall into the abyss of delusion for another 100,000 lifetimes. But it's very interesting to me that living intuitively is much more, I think, about having a firm, unshakable core of beliefs or faith in God or pole star of some kind. Now, of course, mine is mine, and my life experience can't be replicated at this point. But that doesn't mean that the pole star doesn't exist, and that doesn't mean that Master, Babaji, Krishna, your guardian angel, Lord Ganesha, Swamiji, Padre Pio, St. Francis, whoever, a pole star or a pole star of how can I serve? How can I love? Whatever really moves you. Before I met Swami, I had a pole star. It's just that I couldn't see it clearly. I wanted to be happy, which I realized meant I wanted mastery over my own consciousness, and I wanted to take down the narrow boundaries of my consciousness. I felt very limited. I didn't understand that, but that's what I felt. I wanted to be happy, and I wanted to be helpful to people. And I really wanted to be helpful to people, and I really didn't know how to help people. And that was just an anguishing reality for me. Then I met Swami, and I could tell that he had mastery over his consciousness, number one, and that he was dedicated to helping people, number two. So even in my casting about before I met him, The pole star was, I knew that a pole star existed, and I knew what its general outline was. But I did feel adrift on a sea of confusion. And there were lots of feelings, but they weren't pure and calm. And they were desperate. I was desperate to fix myself to something I could trust, but I never saw anything I could trust. And then when I did, I was ready. But that's where intuition comes from, because it puts you in a state of calm feeling. And it gives you a yardstick. And I've said all these words before, I just never put it together with intuition. That once I found the spiritual path, which I actually found 3 years before I met Swamiji. And so I knew it was there, but until I met Swamiji, I couldn't apply it. But at least there was a line, and I had a point where I was tethered. And and it was the path of self-realization. I couldn't figure out how to live it, which was very annoying. And Swamiji showed me how to live it. But what it became is, there is a straight line that I know where center is. Just that. I know where center is. And over time, I've been able to feel when I'm off. Getting back is not always, instantaneous. But because there is a center, I can tell when I'm off. And that means I've moved from pure calm feeling into emotion. And as soon as I'm in emotion, I can't be intuitive. But as soon as I get back into pure calm feeling, then intuition is natural. See, that is actually, I think that's the final point that I want to say. I always thought that intuition was something else, and I didn't think I was having it. But when you are, and God knows, and all my friends know, I move off of that pure calm feeling pretty often. I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, I had to drop out of something that was really important. I said to the people around me, I am so off. It doesn't matter whether what I'm saying is true. I am so off that everything I'm doing here is not right, and I have to get back, because there is a center point. And when you live in that center point, you don't know that you're being intuitive. You're just acting according to the values that you have, with the spirit that is consistent with those values. And you don't have to call it intuition. You don't even have to think about it. It's that my life is a consistent whole. My beliefs, my actions are consistent. And that's the best that we can do. So I hope this is helpful to you all. It's really been, and I say thank you, it's really been a revelation to me. It's shifted my whole understanding of a subject I've been trying to understand for 50 years. I see it from a much sweeter perspective. I'm going to go a couple of minutes longer just to say one more thing here. Swamiji's intuition was so interesting. This came up first in 1976 when we did this little political action thing in Nevada County to get the planning director fired so that we could get our master plan through. It was called the Bicentennial Liberty Committee. I talk about it, I believe, in both the books I have about Swamiji, both Swami Kriyananda's, we've known him, and also Light Bearer. It's worth reading. It was great fun. And we started this political campaign, and it worked out perfectly. And there were lots of twists and turns in it, and unexpected thises. I had no idea what we were doing. I just did what Swami asked me to do. And I wrote letters, and I contacted people, and I spoke at public meetings, and I gathered signatures. And in the end, we got her fired, and it all worked, which was essential. Swami saw that we would never be able to develop unless we got the incompetent woman removed. Her replacement was a qualified professional, and everything moved forward. Not without difficulty, but at least it moved. I said to Swami, when I really saw the twists and turns, I said, did you know this was what was going to happen? He said, not exactly, he said, but I'm not surprised. And then what he said to me was this: he's so accustomed to following his intuition that he just does whatever feels right to him, and he doesn't even inquire as to where it's going, because he knows that if he acts consistently with that inner feeling, then it's all in God's hands and it will come out. And so I saw many times in Swami's life And at first, you see, I thought he was thinking it through and calculating. Then I realized it was exactly the opposite. He was so accustomed to just moving from intuition, which was pure calm feeling. He could act with perfect faith in the moment, knowing that as long as that was what he was doing, everything else would unfold as it meant to. Not always successfully, but according to God's will. In other words, his intuition was perfectly natural to him, just perfectly natural. And that was a clue that I've been thinking about for all these decades, but I think I finally have it. And his pole star was Master, and he was very accustomed to feeling Master's imprint of approval on what he did, and he never acted unless he felt it. He talked about 1 or 2 times when he experimented and it was a disaster. And even when things appeared to be a disaster, one time when it appeared to be a disaster, he didn't care that it was a disaster. That was not a problem for him. He cared that maybe he had misunderstood, that he had thought that Master had approved, but Master hadn't approved. And that sent Swami into a spiral of introspection and withdrawal that lasted several weeks until he said, he said, everything that I'd hoped to accomplish has been accomplished, but not in the way that I expected. So he realized he'd understood Master perfectly. He had just projected onto Master certain expectations that were false. And then as soon as he realized that the essential, most important issue, which is he was in tune, his guru, everything after that was fine. And after that, there was no reason to doubt his intuition, which was fundamental to his living, but it was just like breathing to him, to act in attunement with what he knew to be true and let the chips fall where they may. It was just natural life to him. So living intuitively is natural life. But the premise that's required in order for that to be there is that we have trained ourselves rigidly to operate in attunement with the pole star. And then everything follows from that. God bless you.